Teresa Moran Weeb, Youth Wellness Director for the Dairy Council of Florida. And I'm here today to introduce our next speaker, who's really going to get to the bottom of why school meals are so important. We all see the positive effects from school meals, but how exactly do they have that effect? Our next speaker has spent over 2 decades in the field of pediatric gastroenterology and nutrition at the Ohio State University School of Medicine, learning the answers to this question. For 5 years, he offered medical and surgical treatments for child and adolescent obesity as the director for the Center for Healthy Weight and Nutrition. He's been the pediatric medical director for Abbott Nutrition, an executive committee member of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on School Health, and he's a board member of 2 national children's hunger organizations, Action for Healthy Kids and the Children's Hunger Alliance. He lives and breathes child nutrition, and he's going to explain the scientific reasoning behind the importance of nutritious school meals in a language we can all understand. And now, Dr. Robert Murray.
Well, thanks, Teresa. It was great, and welcome to the afternoon session to everybody. I wanted to take the opportunity, as I always do, to try and speak with school nutrition directors and teams because of all the work that you do that crosses the work that we do as pediatricians. So I thought I'd take advantage of this and talk a little bit about the science of the whole child model and what we've learned just in the past couple of decades. Here. First of all, shout out to our sponsor, M&B Products, and thank you so much for allowing us to have this session. As you know, the whole child model involves a lot of different moving parts, and it's a much different model than the CDC used to have. At the center of this model is a child who is healthy, safe, engaged, challenged, and supported. And we have a lot of evidence as to how these various factors fit together to make a child do their absolute best, optimal performance in school and socially in life. I could talk about any one of these buckets, and each one of them has a very deep vein of research now to give us a strong sense of what we mean by the learning connection, which is that a healthy child is a better learner. And so I want to just skim over some of the factors that put this together and give us a sense of what the learning connection really means in terms of health, activity, good nutrition, and the child's performance in school. Well, one of the reasons that we have learned so much just since the year 2000 has been the technology has been exploding in medicine, as you know. And as the technology has given us an opportunity to look closer and closer at how the brain forms and how the brain functions, we're starting to realize the component pieces that go into how a child thinks and how they learn at various ages. So this is something that goes hand in hand. Our advances in technology really have opened up advances in our understanding of children. One of the things that we have come across in the last couple of decades has been how the child really puts together their view of the world, their skill set, the things that they need to perform. And what's interesting to me is that first year, you know, little babies are born with just a handful of reflexes. And from the first day, they begin putting together information and advancing their skills to do a better and better job of exploring their environment. This is critically important in the first couple of years. And based on that sensory motor exploration, they will build language skills, reading skills, writing skills, and then advance cognitive development later on. So this early platform is critically important. Well, one of the things people, even parents, forget is that little kids, part of that learning and that exploration and that sensory motor understanding of the world really centers around food as well. Nutrition changes dramatically from birth and then introduction of solids at 6 months, increasing complexity, family meals, school meals, all of these things are part of a child's exploration of the world, and they make up part of that platform of learning. The other thing we learned, and this is a fascinating piece of information, is that the brain does not grow uniformly. It is not a homogeneous structure. It's a series of different spheres within the brain, and they grow at different times and different paces. And they also grow due to different stimuli in life. So one of the things that's interesting is that the middle of the brain really grows first. It occurs very early in life. You see this transition from a happy, chubby 1-year-old over to a child who's much more emotional and much more interactive in terms of their emotions. And the reason is that this midbrain is made up of our stress center and our emotional center, and that really takes precedence in the year 2 and year 3. But then over time, this personality of kind of anxious, fearful, impulsive, inattentive changes dramatically as the child matures, because they're being taught front brain skills, so-called executive skills. And this is really what makes us human. So you take this kind of emotional center brain, agitated, fearful child, and their personality changes as they learn to control their emotions and then think through what happens if I do this? What happens if I jump in this pool? What happens if I don't look both ways in the street? And they start to put together this thinking brain. This makes all the difference in the child's eventual ability, not only to think, but to perform with other people. We know what it takes to do optimal child development in the early years. It takes good nutrition, and we'll talk about that, but it also takes a nurturing adult, and it takes experiences, exploration and experiences that challenge the child to develop new skills. Interestingly enough, this nurturing piece is not a parent necessarily. It's a nurturing adult, and that could be a grandparent, a sibling, and it also could be people in the church, or it could be the school food service staff provides a sense to the child that they're supported, that somebody has their back, and that is part of a development of willingness to try new things and explore more fully. So this is a very critical trio early in life. Here's where executive skills go. If you follow this out, there is this explosion of executive skills in the preschool period, and it continues all the way through elementary, middle school, and even college before our executive functions become fully wired in the brain. So there's a lot of opportunity in school to really help teach kids and show them how to practice these skills, both in the classroom and with each other on the playground. You can see in this bottom graph that the brain's plasticity, its ability to be molded, drops precipitously from early years. And once the brain's fully wired at the age of 25 to 30, it becomes increasingly difficult for us to change until finally you get out to my age and it's just not going to happen. So, you've got this opportunity in preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school to really help that child gain control of their own personality and their own abilities. And that really has become part of what makes up the schools manifest their responsibility. Well, we've learned a lot. Things look a lot different this year than they did in 2019. And certainly COVID has kind of shaken the tree for everybody. But I think one of the things that's happened is parents and school officials and policymakers around the country have come to understand the importance of nutrition, mainly because when kids had to leave school, they lost that nutritional base that was so important. And it's been a real learning experience for everyone, looking now at how school nutrition underpins this child's life. So let me just go through a little bit of science. I'll walk you back through the horrors of early biology. You can see here that here's the so-called digestive tract here, the GI tract. It's got the esophagus, the stomach, the intestine, the colon, liver, pancreas here. And if you're inside the intestine and cut away that tube, it looks like this. Here's a close-up. These so-called villi are like little fingers that project out. And because there's so many of them, because there are just so many of them in there, it increases the surface area to make sure that we digest all of our food, digest it and absorb it. So here's the villi if you did a cutaway, and then here's a real close-up on that single cell layer. What I wanted to point out to you is that nutrition is something that really fuels immunity, this immune relationship between things going through the lumen and the immune system below the one cell thick epithelial lining. But look at all the nutrients that we need just to keep the epithelium intact to support cellular or kind of first response immunity, and then also support our memory antibodies. These are the things that are long-term immunity against infections. So the initial barrier to COVID occurs here. And if they get through, it's cellular immunity, innate immunity, that is the first counterpunch. And then later, our antibodies, as we get immunizations or we have experience, we develop antibodies, and that's our long-term memory. One of the reasons that's been speculated why kids do so well with COVID is that they have a very strong cellular immunity. It's young and it's powerful. And as we get older, that cellular immunity loses some of its punch. So it may be that at least the initial variant, kids got spared mainly because they had this powerful cellular immunity there. Well, if you look a little closer at that, here's our villi sticking out into the lumen. Here are the luminal content. The things that are coming down through the lumen are bacteria, viruses, chemicals, allergens, along with nutrients. There's this one cell thick epithelial barrier, which is actually very sophisticated. And then below that, there is the immune system, the blood vessels and vascular system, and the neurons and the part of the central nervous system. In fact, a huge part of the central nervous system resides in this part of the body. And what's interesting is that this immune system here and the contents of our lumen and the bacteria that live in the lumen communicate back and forth constantly. There is a constant signaling that goes back and forth across this epithelial layer. And this is really how our body maintains a balance of immune strength, but at the same time, not immune overwhelming us. And at the same time, seeing pathogens every day, but not being overwhelmed by those pathogens. This balance is extremely delicate and very well conserved, very well put together to protect us from a number of different possible invaders. The piece about nutrition that I find fascinating when thinking about infections and children growing up and learning, the last 3 dietary guideline advisory committees have all said the same thing, that if you eat a high quality dietary pattern as part of your daily life, you will decrease your risk of and decrease the severity of not just infections like COVID, but all of these things: heart disease, stroke, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, osteoporosis. In other words, a strong dietary pattern is the platform on which we maintain our strength, our ability to rebound from various things that happen to us. And COVID was no different from that. If you had a really strong dietary pattern, you had optimal nutrition, optimal immunity, optimal benefit of your body being able to fight back against infection. So what is a healthful dietary pattern? And that's kind of been a bugaboo since the original Dietary Guidelines Committee in 2005 started talking about the literature saying if you eat a healthful dietary pattern, it impacts all these different illnesses. And you see these things showing up all the time, plant oils, fish, nuts and seeds, vegetables and fruit, dairy. These are things that are really the component pieces that make up a strong dietary pattern. But I wanted you to appreciate the fact that each person that's listening here and all the people that in the country, each person has their own dietary pattern. It's based on your food preferences, your experiences, based on your family and your culture, and very much geographic around the world. So there is no one optimal dietary pattern. The dietary advisory committees have told us there are thousands of ways of building a healthful dietary pattern. And the thing I think has to be appreciated is that if you're going to change your dietary pattern and try and improve it, you won't throw it over wholesale. You will build it and make incremental changes. And that's really what we're looking to do with children, particularly when we look at opportunities like school meals, summer meals. Those are the things that we can use to try and tweak their dietary pattern to make it stronger. How do we know if we're winning or losing on that? And what has come up with is a healthy eating index, and it's a score of how well a diet matches the directives of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. So it's really based on the dietary guidelines and their recommendation for things we should eat, healthful servings, and things we should moderate, like refined grains and sodium and sugar. And the balance between the two gives us a score. Optimal score is 100 points if you had the perfect diet. Well, if you look at the average scores of children on the bottom, 2 to 5-year-olds are approaching 60 points out of 100, 6 to 11-year-olds, 53, 12 to 17-year-olds, the worst diet in America, probably teen girls at 52, and then seniors go way up to almost 70 now, mainly because I think they get scared as they get older. But one way or another, we teach them nutrition and it gets better. If you think of this out of 100 points, you can see we still have a long way to go to get the American child into a place where their diet is extremely strong. But we have made great strides, and that's the story I want to tell you a little bit about right now. First of all, we put a lot of investment into school meals. As you know, we're pushing $20 billion a year. And what we really want from that is we wanted first, when it was designed, we wanted first to protect kids who were the most at risk. If you see at the bottom, we're running about 55% of kids are eligible for free and reduced price meals. So we're a nation that is a wealthy nation, but we have a lot of impoverished kids, as you know. And these programs were designed to really put a foundation under their feet and not let them drift into malnutrition. So we put a lot of investment into it, and we're getting a lot back in exchange for it. This is where we've come from just in the past 25 years. Probably the worst diet, the worst period of diet for this country in the last 100 years was 1999. Remember, we went through this period of fat phobia and everybody was avoiding fats and saturated fats, but they were eating tons of carbohydrates, a lot of simple carbohydrates like sugars, and it peaked in 1999. Since then, Americans have been shifting their diet back toward a more balanced diet. And I want to point out this improvement because I think school meals, when I go back and look at the data on school meals, they have consistently gotten better and better and better, starting back in the early 90s particularly. And it's been a constant improvement since that time. The most dramatic improvement came in 2010 when the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act was passed. And the intent of the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act was to align school meals as closely as possible to the dietary guidelines. You can see here that just between 2011-12, when those rules and regulations first were implemented in schools, and today there's been a great leap in the healthy eating index scores of children across the country. I see this continual progress as being a strong indication that school meals have played a major role in making this happen and that kids' diets are continually getting better over time. If you use the HEI, looking at the most recent data and compare 2009 before the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act and 2014 and 15, about 2 or 3 years after it was implemented, look at the HEI scores for lunches. They rose from a average score of 58 to an average score of 82 out of 100, a tremendous increase in the quality of those meals in alignment with the dietary guidelines. School breakfasts have gotten stronger and stronger. And by this point in time, they went from 50 to 71 as their score. This has been a dramatic thing, and you should definitely be proud of all the things that you did since the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act to make that act work. They didn't give you any money to do it, or not much money, but boy, the innovation and the changes have been extremely good in school. I wanted to show you this because, you know, back in 2005, I wrote a policy statement with the American Academy of Pediatrics, trying to get schools to move away from these vending rights, you know, where Coca-Cola would own the school essentially and really would promote products within the school. Coke did it, Pepsi did it, they all did it. And we wanted to see them move away. Well, the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, part of it gave the school nutrition team, school food service, the authority over vended foods in school. And that made all the difference in changing the quality of that vended food. As a result of that, lots of changes took place in how kids consume solid foods, but look at the difference now in 2013 to 16 of how they consume beverages. This is looking across the country. Water now makes up 43% of their beverages. Soda and fruit drinks, which are just sugar water, have shrunk dramatically. This is not even across the country. Many of you know, if you look in impoverished schools, urban schools, African-American, Hispanic based communities, you still see a lot of soft drinks, but the changes that have been taking place are very positive in this regard. On the negative side, we made these changes and we substituted water, which is non-caloric, and American kids can use less and less calories, but water is also non-nutritive. And this was a great opportunity to see if we were swapping things out. Could we increase milk and get children closer to the 3 a day that they need? The answer was it didn't move very much. We still have a long way to go to use dairy to drive a better healthy eating index score. But I'll tell you this as a side fact, the milk that's consumed in America by children, 70% of it is accountable to the school. So the fact that you offer school breakfast, school lunch, school snacks that are milk-based really is supporting that, that food group. We've only got 5 food groups. If school meals were taken away, the whole dairy food group would disappear for a large majority of kids. Well, as you know, one of the ways that the USDA and the government responded to COVID was to give waivers against a lot of the rules and regulations that are so difficult to enact once the kids were not in school and we lost control over seeing them every day and the ability to interact with them nutritionally every day. This community eligibility provision became a real powerhouse of allowing us to get food to children free of all the encumbrances. I mean, the name of the game during the last year was get food into kids' bellies and do it in any possible way that would be efficient. This has been a real learning experience for policymakers because they realized when it came to trying reaching these kids, and when you think about it in the school year or the summer, how hard it is in the summer to do it, and now how hard it's been with a hybrid model, they came to realize that if they were going to support the child and get the best they can get out of the child in school, they had to take some of those regulations down. And I'm hoping, really hoping, that those regulations stay down across the country after we get immunizations in place, because this was a very challenging year, and people really stepped up all across society. So let's talk a little bit about learning, because I find this interesting. Nutrition has a very important role in learning and in kids doing well in school. If you're going to learn something, I'm going to tell you information. The first thing you'll do is you'll be attentive to that information, and you do what's called working memory, where you take the information and put it in the context of things that you know. Then you encode that memory in the brain, and it goes through short-term storage to long-term storage, where you can then retrieve it. This is such a simple looking little graph, but it actually requires a number of factors to be working well to make it happen. First of all, nutrition. If you look at this, one of the things that you can take away is it's not about iron or omega-3 or lutein or choline. It's about the collective nutrition, the quality of the nutrition across the board on a consistent day-to-day basis is what it takes to build and maintain the brain and use it for cognitive performance. If you look here in the upper left, right here, these are all components of neurotransmitters. And as you know, those neurotransmitters are the chemicals that really allow us not only to think, but it allows us to pay attention. It allows us our emotional makeup, and it helps us with keeping depression at bay and our focus sharp. So just those few things in the brain require nutrition on a consistent basis as the child's brain is growing and wiring. And a lot of that is coming from school meals. Here's why breakfast has been carped on so much for the last couple of decades. We've all been talking about it for forever, but the science has gotten stronger and stronger. These are brain scans, and if you think of it, you're laying on the ground looking up, and these are slices that go through the skull. The front brain is here, and the back brain is here. This is a panel of people who have been fasted for a prolonged period of time. And what you see is that midbrain that we talked about in the terrible twos. You saw the midbrain as our emotional center, our stress center. That's what's lighting up in the fasted individual. This is a person who will be distracted and irritable and anxious and very unlikely to have the attention to focus on learning. Now look what happens when you give them food and they produce glucose and it goes into the brain. It's the front brain that's lighting up, and the midbrain goes quiet. This is the child who's attentive, they're calm, they're focused, they're organized, and they're ready to learn and encode new information in their brain. This child is not going to be able to learn. You can talk all you want and spend as many hours of teaching as you want. It's this child that really is capable of learning. Part of the reason that we're interested in breakfast centers exactly around that. We want something that breaks the fast in the morning, but we also want a meal that has legs and has a rise in glucose that is slow and low and goes a long, long time. If I give somebody a Cinnabon and a Mountain Dew in the morning, this is what you get, a big surge of glucose, but it's gone as fast as it comes on. And when you get out into the second hour and the third hour of the morning, they've got nothing left to fuel that front brain attention. They're getting hungry, their middle brain is working overtime, and they're not able to learn. So one of the things that you were asked to do in the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act is design breakfast with a few different components, fruits, milk, grains, and those grains as much as possible be whole grains or high fiber grains to the extent possible. Those are the ones that have the long legs. And the closer to learning you feed that breakfast, the more powerful it is. Let me show you some statistics here. Here was a study that was done in 2009, and Hoyland looked at 45 different breakfast studies in children. And the interesting thing was they were designed all different ways and all different groups of kids and all different breakfasts and things. But what Hoyland found was almost every study was positive in these children. The most positivity came with vulnerable kids. Our highest risk kids did the best when they had breakfast. And in-school breakfast was the most effective because you served a breakfast right at the time you're asking the child to begin to perform and think. And that really was a powerful pairing. Math and memory, particularly good. The reports from the kids in terms of satiety and attention and memory were better. And as I said, the highest risk kids got the most out of it. This is a study done by Deloitte for Share Our Strength, and they found, similarly in 2013, less hunger, more attention, better attendance and less tardiness, fewer visits to the school nurse for headache and stomach ache, which, as you know, is really hunger, lower obesity rates overall, better math scores, and higher graduation rates. Early on, a lot of people blame school food for obesity rates, but the studies are very clear. School lunch does not increase risk of obesity, and school breakfast, on the contrary, is associated with lower rates of obesity. So even though they're getting more calories when they're eating school breakfast and lunch than they may be getting elsewhere, it's not going into obesity. It's an important finding that we have. The innovations you all have used to increase breakfast, and I should just make a point of that and go back, breakfasts have doubled in just the past decade and a half, and we are increasing every year. And school food service directors and their staff have really innovated a number of ways, not only for the quality of the breakfast, but also for the opportunity to eat it in different venues. This became a big deal, obviously, in the COVID months because they couldn't pack the cafeteria with kids. They wanted to have social distancing. And so a lot of these things, even in schools that were hesitant to pick it up, they've now gone over to grab and go from the cafeteria or directly placed in the classroom. Breakfast boxes, late breakfast options, which is very important for high school students, opportunities so that kids under any circumstances, late bus, late parental drop off, they still can get their breakfast. These innovations have been driving increased breakfast utilization, and it's making a difference in the total quality of the diet. The other thing we've got evidence for, thinking about all the little evidence things making up the whole child model, is how activity works in the brain. You get more blood flow, more glucose, and a lot more activity in the front brain when you exercise. It helps enhance working memory. So if I give them new information and they have to begin to put that information into context of what they already know, that requires a certain amount of time and mental juggling. And activity is one of the things that really sets the child up to do that well. It helps them encode those memories so that later when you say, tell me all you can about the Civil War, they have that and can retrieve those memories. So this was one of the things that we got lots of information between 2000 and today on physical activity and its benefits. We also learned that it's not quantity of teaching time, but it may be how that teaching time is used. A number of Scandinavian countries, Japanese and Asian countries are going to a 50-minute hour to take advantage of having a period at the end of the hour, at the end of intensive learning, where the child relaxes, de-stresses, is physically active, and pumps that oxygen and glucose into the brain, and then prepares for the next topic. This 10-minute investment is an important investment, and we think it's going to make a huge difference because it allows kids to de-stress and prepare for the next intensive learning. The other thing that we know from recess research, which has gone on for the past 30 years, is that recess makes a difference because this is the only place where kids have peer-to-peer working out of differences. What rules are going to apply? Who gets a do-over? How do you mediate differences and disagreements? Those are very powerful skills, and they're learned on the playground. So the trend to move away from recess was extremely negative direction in terms of getting the most out of the child and helping them learn. These are the social and emotional skills that kids learn peer to peer. They learn it in preschool, they learn it in kindergarten, and they continue to learn these skills through elementary, middle, and high school. So you're really there as they learn these skills and then practice them. And it's peer to peer on the recess playground where kids really exercise their social and emotional skills. I want to just close with a couple of other things that you'll recognize. You can see why sleep is so important. Huge percentage of kids, about 30% of kids coming into kindergarten have problem with sleep. It gets very bad in middle and high school, particularly high school kids. Well, the sleep deprived student, you can see what part of the brain is lighting up. It's that midbrain, it's that emotional center. They're irritable, they're anxious, they're inattentive. A sleep deprived kid cannot learn. It changes all of these things about their ability to think and their metabolism, their hunger, and their ability to use executive functions gets lost when they have sleep problems. And the other thing we've learned, particularly in the last 10 years or so, is that a depressed child has that same picture. In fact, depression and sleep disorders run hand in hand. If you have sleep disorders, you're prone to depression. And if you have depression, you're prone then to have disrupted sleep. You get that same pattern where the midbrain is the only part of the brain lighting up. And then when you are not depressed, the whole brain can come into function. It's a real problem that we have. So schools have started to think about, how do I ensure that my kids are well rested and ready to learn? And how do I get more mental health resources to nip this in the bud when they're depressed? So if you look at this model from our perspective in pediatrics, all of these different components go into helping the child to learn. This is the learning connection. We've got a lot of evidence that they each play a role, that there is no one magic bullet. You need to make that whole child whole, wholly healthy, and that will be the child who has the ability to learn. You play an enormous role in this, in the school food service. It wasn't recognized in 2019, but I guarantee you in 2021, policymakers, parents, and others in society have come to recognize what you do and why it's important. And I hope we can take advantage of that to advance more and better agricultural bills that really allow us to build up school food service even further. There are some grants available, and I just want to mention it because some of these grants, I've seen it all over the country. They make an enormous difference in getting equipment and getting kids engaged. Fuel Up to Play 60, centered on children and their ideas for how to become more physically active and better nourished. Action for Healthy Kids, where I'm on the board, they focus on parents and adults and other caregivers from the community helping the school. And then, of course, the dairy farmers have been committed all over the country to nutrition, high quality nutrition since the inception of the USDA way back in the 1800s. So this is something, take advantage of this, get these grants, work on your school, and keep making those incremental changes. You're making an enormous difference, and I applaud you for that. As a pediatrician, I know the importance of what you do. So thank you all. Have a great meeting.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Murray. That was wonderful. So insightful. Great to see that learning connection and positive association for breakfast. So we're going to open it up. If you have any questions for Dr. Murray, you can certainly put them in the chat. I've seen a lot of conversation here. Thanking you, Dr. Murray. Such great information. So we'll give a few minutes to let folks think and see if they have anything they want to ask. Lots of thank yous. Very informative. Thank you for such a fine presentation. We'll give a few more minutes.
I can think of one. I have a question. It's Martina Brower here at FSNA. Dr. Murray, what do you think about trans fats, and even that there is even trans fat in some of the products that our kids are eating and that we're eating, even though it says 0 on the label? Is that hype, or do you believe it?
Well, there's been an enormous improvement in trans fats in the last decade or so, since it's really been recognized how important trans fats are in ultra-processed food, particularly the fats in ultra-processed food, in terms of risk of cardiovascular disease. We're going through a reassessment of fat, and we're looking at differences in how the fat molecule is packaged, is making up the difference in how it serves as a risk factor or not. For example, in dairy, the saturated fat in dairy is packaged very differently from the saturated fat in beef, red meat, and particularly the saturated fat in something highly processed like bacon. Of the three, dairy fat, saturated fat, seems to have no detrimental effects. Red meat fats in moderation seem to be fine, but it's those processed meats where you get into trouble. So beef jerky and bacon are probably not your ideal source of meat. I know you're talking to me, but but I think that we have done a good job of getting trans fats out of food processing. It was in all kinds of different things back in the 90s. We've really expunged that, and out of restaurants and other things like that, the amount that we're eating is less and less. And obviously in school food, we'd like to minimize that type of fat, that trans fat. We'd like to absolutely minimize that or get rid of it altogether in the food if that's possible. Yeah. It's complex, unfortunately, and it's kind of like carbohydrates. We said, well, they're not all the same. And now we're saying the same thing about saturated fat. So it's the confusion of nutrition, I think, for people.
Right. I see another question, Dr. Murray. What is an important change you feel still needs to be made to continue on the course to improve school meals overall, if any?
Yeah, I've often thought about that, and of course, I'd love to hear what you all have to say because you're the experts on this. If I was capable of getting the Agricultural Committee in the House and the Senate when they did the next iteration, if I was capable of getting enough additional money, I would love to see protein part of school breakfast. Protein's expensive. It's the real difficult thing is getting high quality protein. We generally do pretty well in the US, but I'd love to see it as part of the school breakfast because it aids with satiety. And if we can have a good mix of fats, carbs, and protein in breakfast, it will give us that long learning tail that we're looking for. And I think it's just a really great thing when you break your fast overnight to have protein in there. We're dependent on 3 or 4 things for protein, particularly dairy supplies the protein, peanut butter supplies the protein, and then of course eggs. Anytime you get eggs or beans and rice, those kind of things currently supply the protein. So we're doing well. It's just I'd love to see an opportunity to expand it a little bit more.
Perfect. Another one. How do you feel about the time allotted for school meals?
That's a real problem. And as you know, I think the corollary problem to that is plate waste, where little children across the spectrum are throwing away about 35% of the food we put on their tray. And that I think is, you can make the school meal really great, but if you rush them and they don't finish, you're not getting, excuse me, you're not getting that benefit. So again, the time in the 90s under, No Child Left Behind, time was of the essence and everything was getting thrown out to try and get more minutes. But I think one of the things we would caution is that it's really the quality of the time, and that spending the extra time to eat and the extra time for physical activity and recess is worth the investment. That would be the message I would give to school superintendents.
Perfect. The only other conversation I saw in the chat was kind of more towards Martina. Someone had mentioned they would love to be able to see the slides. I don't know if they'll be made available afterwards.
They certainly can be. If you want to post them on your website, I'm happy to have you take those.
Well, thank you, Dr. Murray. Yeah, we didn't want to put you on the spot, but if you're going to volunteer that, we will most definitely share your information on our website, and then some of the folks on these calls can get them through to teachers and principals and help them understand the importance of like breakfast in the classroom.
Yeah. And, I have been working with FSNA nationally and National Dairy Council and AAP, and we've produced a short video that's kind of a synopsis of what we just presented today, where I did that video. And then we've made handouts around specific things, why breakfast is important, with some key talking points. So that's going to be rolled out next month, and please take advantage of it. Go on the FSNA website and download all that stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll put it on our front page. This is wonderful.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, any way I can help, let me know. And good luck with it. I'm glad that you're including nutrition, another picture of nutrition from the outside. I welcome the opportunity to talk with you. And again, thank you for all that you do.